Welcome back to Wars That Made the Modern World, a journey through the conflicts that didn't just end lives. They ended eras. Before Rome, before empires stretched across continents, two city-states stood at the heart of civilization. Athens, radiant with art, philosophy, and the birth of democracy. Sparta, forged in iron, ruled by fear and raised for war. For nearly 3 decades, they fought not for land, but for the soul of Greece. It was a war of ambition, betrayal, and unthinkable loss. And when it ended, the world that had birthed Socrates, Pericles, and the Parthenon was no more. If this is your first time here, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. We're diving deep into the conflicts that didn't just change history, they rewrote it entirely. And if you're already part of our community, thank you for being here. This is not just a story of swords and shields. It's the story of a world tearing itself apart. Welcome to Wars That Made the Modern World. This is the Peloponnesian War. And this is where everything began to fall. The Golden Age, before the storm. Picture Greece in the mid-5th century BCE. The Persian threat has been repelled. The great battles of Marathon, Thermopylae, and Salamis are fresh memories. Victory has brought unprecedented prosperity and confidence to the Greek world. But victory also brought division. Athens emerged from the Persian Wars, transformed. What began as a loose alliance of Greek city-states, the Delian League, had become something else entirely, an Athenian empire. The League's treasury, once housed on the sacred island of Delos, now sat in Athens. What had been voluntary contributions became mandatory tribute. What had been partnership became subjugation. Under Pericles, Athens reached heights of cultural achievement that still dazzle us today. The Parthenon crowned the Acropolis. Sophocles and Euripides filled theaters with tragedy and triumph. Philosophers gathered in the agora to debate the nature of justice, truth, and the good life. Democracy, imperfect, limited, but revolutionary, gave citizens a voice in their own governance. This was the Athens that Pericles called the School of Greece, a city where ideas flowed as freely as wine, where art and architecture proclaimed Athenian greatness to the world, where the concept of the citizen soldier merged with the ideal of the thinking man. The Athenian Empire stretched across the Aegean Sea like a spider's web. Tribute flowed in from hundreds of subject cities. Silver from the mines of Laurium funded the greatest navy the world had ever seen. Trade routes connected Athens to Egypt, Sicily, and the Black Sea. The city had become the New York of the ancient world, a cosmopolitan hub where merchants, artists, and intellectuals from across the Mediterranean came to seek their fortunes. But 50 miles south, across the mountains of Attica, lay a very different world. Sparta had not changed. While Athens experimented with democracy and embraced trade, Sparta remained what it had always been, a military machine operating under the guise of a state. Every Spartan male was a soldier first, citizen second. Their society was built on the labor of helots, state-owned serfs who outnumbered their masters 7-1 and lived under constant threat of death. Where Athens celebrated individual excellence and intellectual achievement, Sparta demanded conformity and military discipline. Where Athens built temples to wisdom and beauty, Sparta built barracks and training grounds. Where Athens looked outward to the sea and foreign trade, Sparta looked inward to the mountains and valleys of the Peloponnese. The Spartan system was brutal in its efficiency. Boys were taken from their families at age 7 and subjected to the agog, a harsh training program designed to create perfect warriors. They learned to endure pain, hunger, and cold without complaint. They were taught that death in battle was the highest honor, that retreat was the ultimate shame, that the needs of the state always came before individual desires. The result was the most feared military force in Greece. Spartan hoplites were virtually unbeatable in traditional combat. Their bronze-tipped spears, heavy shields, and disciplined formations had dominated Greek warfare for centuries. Where other armies broke and ran when faced with superior numbers, Spartans stood their ground and died where they fought. These weren't just different political systems. They were different ways of understanding what it meant to be human. Athens represented the life of the mind, the pursuit of knowledge, the ideal of the citizen as both warrior and philosopher. Sparta represented the life of discipline, the pursuit of honor, the ideal of the citizen as the perfect soldier. The tension between these visions had been building for decades. Athens controlled the seas through its powerful navy and network of alliances. Sparta dominated the land through its unmatched hoplite army and the Peloponnesian League. As Athenian power grew, Spartan anxiety deepened. Fear, not greed, not territory, not resources, though all these played their part. Fear, the fear that one's way of life, one's values, one's very identity might be swept away by forces beyond control. The spark that lit the fire. The year was 431 BCE. The immediate cause seemed almost trivial, a dispute between Corinth and Corcyra over trade routes and colonial influence. But in the interconnected web of Greek alliances, no conflict remained local for long. Corcyra, despite its neutrality, appealed to Athens for support. Corinth, a crucial member of the Peloponnesian League, demanded Spartan intervention. What began as a commercial dispute between two minor powers quickly escalated into a test of the entire Greek alliance system. The crisis deepened when Athens imposed economic sanctions on Megara, a Spartan ally, effectively cutting the city off from Athenian markets. The sanctions were devastating. Megarian trade collapsed, unemployment soared, and famine threatened. It was economic warfare of the most ruthless kind. The Spartans delivered an ultimatum. Athens must dissolve the Delian League, grant autonomy to its subject cities, and lift its economic blockade of Megara. Accept these demands, and peace would continue. Reject them, and face the consequences. Pericles faced an impossible choice. Accept the demands, and Athens would cease to be a great power overnight. Its empire would dissolve, its influence would vanish, and its citizens would be forced to accept a diminished role in Greek affairs. Reject them, and face war with the most formidable military machine in Greece. Standing before the Athenian assembly, Pericles spoke words that would echo through history. War was not just possible, but necessary. Athens could not bow to Spartan demands without surrendering everything that made it great. The city must stand firm, trust in its naval superiority, and prepare for a long struggle. The die was cast. In the summer of 431 BCE, a Spartan army of over 30,000 men crossed the borders of Attica. The Peloponnesian War had begun. But this would be unlike any war the Greeks had ever fought. Previous conflicts had been decided quickly, a single battle, perhaps a brief campaign. This war would drag on for 27 years, consuming an entire generation and transforming the Greek world beyond recognition. Pericles had a strategy. Athens would not meet the Spartans in open battle. That way lay certain defeat. Instead, the Athenians would withdraw behind their long walls, the fortified corridor that connected the city to its port at Piraeus. The navy would maintain control of the sea lanes, ensuring food and supplies continued to flow. Meanwhile, Athenian ships would strike at Spartan territory and allies, slowly bleeding them of resources and resolve. It was a strategy of patience, of endurance, of faith in Athenian naval supremacy. It required the Athenians to watch their farms burn, their olive groves destroyed, their countryside ravaged, all while trusting that their leaders knew what they were doing. The psychological impact was enormous. Thousands of Athenian farmers and their families crowded into the city, abandoning homes their ancestors had worked for generations. They watched from the walls as Spartan soldiers destroyed everything they had built. The smoke from burning farmhouses darkened the sky over Athens for weeks at a time. For 2 years, the strategy seemed to work. Spartan armies invaded Attica each summer, burning and looting, then withdrew to the Peloponnese each winter. Athenian raiders struck the Spartan coast, capturing territory and spreading fear. Neither side could deliver a decisive blow. Then, in the second year of the war, disaster struck from an unexpected direction. The plague and the death of a dream. It began in the summer of 430 BCE. Ships from Egypt and Libya brought more than grain and luxury goods to Piraeus. They brought death. A plague of unprecedented virulence swept through Athens, already overcrowded with refugees from the countryside. The symptoms were horrific. High fever, inflammation of the eyes, bleeding from the throat and tongue, fetid breath, sneezing, hoarseness, violent cough, vomiting, empty retching, terrible restlessness. Many threw themselves into wells and water tanks in their desperate thirst. Most died within 7 to 9 days of the first symptoms. But the physical suffering was only part of the horror. The plague destroyed the social fabric of Athens itself. Families abandoned their sick. Sacred burial rites were ignored. Bodies piled up in temples and streets. The rule of law broke down as people realized that virtue and vice received the same reward: death. In 2 years, the plague killed roughly 1/3 of Athens' population. Among the dead was Pericles himself, the architect of Athenian strategy and the embodiment of its golden age. The man who had guided Athens to unprecedented heights died in agony, his great plans in ruins around him. With Pericles gone, Athenian politics descended into chaos. Demagogues like Cleon rose to power, promising easy victories and quick solutions. The careful, patient strategy of naval blockade and defensive warfare gave way to aggressive adventures and reckless gambles. The plague had done what Spartan armies could not. It had broken the spirit of Athens. The city that had once been the school of Greece was learning bitter lessons about the limits of human ambition and the fragility of civilization itself. War as teacher, philosophy in the shadows. Yet even in this darkest hour, Athens remained what it had always been, a place where ideas mattered, where the life of the mind continued even as the world collapsed around it. Among the hoplites who marched out to face Spartan spears was a stonemason's son named Socrates. Already middle-aged when the war began, Socrates served with distinction in several campaigns. His courage at the Battle of Delium was legendary. When the Athenian line broke and fled, Socrates walked calmly from the field, his steady gaze deterring any Spartan from approaching too closely. But Socrates was fighting a different kind of war. While his fellow citizens debated strategy and tactics in the assembly, Socrates waged a campaign against ignorance, superstition, and self-deception in the marketplaces and gymnasia of Athens. His weapon was not the spear, but the question. His enemy was not Sparta, but the unexamined life. The war provided a perfect laboratory for Socratic inquiry. What is courage? What is justice? What is wisdom? These questions took on desperate urgency as the war dragged on. The old certainties were crumbling. The gods seemed absent or hostile. Traditional values appeared meaningless in the face of arbitrary death and sudden reversals of fortune. Philosophy continued to flourish, but it was a philosophy tempered by suffering and loss. The great questions remained, but the easy answers had been stripped away. Athens had created the intellectual framework for understanding justice, virtue, and the good life. Yet this same city was tearing itself apart in the most savage and destructive war the Greek world had ever seen. The contrast was stark and tragic. In the morning, Athenians might attend a performance of Sophocles' latest tragedy, contemplating the nature of fate and human responsibility. In the afternoon, they might vote to execute the male population of a rebellious city and sell the women and children into slavery. The same citizens who celebrated wisdom and beauty proved capable of breathtaking cruelty when their survival was at stake. War, as one observer noted, was indeed a violent teacher, and its lessons would echo through Western thought for millennia to come. The Sicilian disaster, hubris meets reality. By 415 BCE, 15 years into the war, Athens had achieved an uneasy stalemate with Sparta. The Peace of Nicias, signed in 421, had paused the fighting, but resolved nothing. Both sides continued to maneuver for advantage, supporting each other's enemies and seeking new allies. It was at this moment of apparent calm that Athens made the decision that would ultimately destroy it: the invasion of Sicily. The idea seemed brilliant in its audacity. Sicily was rich, powerful, and largely neutral in the Greek conflict. If Athens could conquer or control the island, it would gain enormous resources and deny them to Sparta. The plan's chief advocate was Alcibiades, the most fascinating and destructive figure of his generation. Brilliant, beautiful, and utterly without scruples, Alcibiades embodied both the best and worst of Athenian character. He was a student of Socrates who seemed to have learned all the wrong lessons. Standing before the Athenian assembly, Alcibiades painted a vision of unlimited empire. The older, more cautious voices were drowned out. Nicias, the architect of the peace treaty, warned of the enormous costs and risks. He pointed out that Athens still faced enemies at home, that Sicily was far away and full of unknown dangers, that the expedition would strain Athenian resources to the breaking point. His warnings only inflamed Athenian enthusiasm. If the expedition was as dangerous as Nicias claimed, then surely it required an even larger force, more ships, more men, more resources. In the summer of 415 BCE, the greatest armada in Greek history sailed from Piraeus. Over 130 triremes, 5,000 hoplites, and 30,000 total personnel departed amid scenes of unprecedented celebration. It was the high-water mark of Athenian ambition. Never before had a single Greek city assembled such a force. It was also the beginning of the end. The expedition was doomed from the start by scandal and divided leadership. Just before departure, someone mutilated the Hermae, sacred statues of Hermes that stood throughout Athens. Suspicion fell on Alcibiades. Rather than face trial, he fled to Sparta, taking his knowledge of Athenian plans and weaknesses with him. Command fell to Nicias, the man who had opposed the expedition from the beginning. Half-hearted leadership, combined with supply problems, disease, and fierce Sicilian resistance to create a perfect storm of disaster. The siege of Syracuse dragged on for 2 years. What was supposed to be a swift campaign of conquest became a grueling war of attrition that Athens could not afford. In 413 BCE, it all came to an end. The Athenian fleet was trapped in Syracuse harbor and destroyed. The army, attempting to retreat overland, was surrounded and captured. 7,000 Athenian prisoners were left to die slowly in the stone quarries of Syracuse. Of the vast armada that had sailed from Piraeus 2 years earlier, almost none returned. An entire generation of Athenian youth was gone. The treasury was empty. The empire was in revolt. The end of everything. The destruction of the Sicilian Expedition should have ended the war. Athens was broken, bankrupt, and defenseless. Its allies were in revolt, its treasury empty, its navy destroyed. By every rational calculation, Sparta had won. But Athens refused to surrender. Drawing on reserves of determination that amazed even their enemies, the Athenians built new ships, trained new crews, and continued fighting. The war entered its final and most savage phase. Sparta, meanwhile, had learned the crucial lesson of the conflict. Sea power was the key to victory. With Persian gold and Phoenician expertise, the Spartans built a navy to match their army. The war that had begun as a clash between land power and sea power became a struggle for control of the Aegean itself. The final act belonged to Lysander, a Spartan commander who combined traditional Spartan virtues with a thoroughly un-Spartan willingness to embrace new ideas and foreign alliances. Working closely with the Persian prince Cyrus, Lysander assembled a fleet that could match Athens ship for ship. The end came at Aegospotami in 405 BCE. Through superior tactics and Athenian overconfidence, Lysander managed to surprise and destroy the last Athenian fleet. In a single afternoon, Athenian naval supremacy, the foundation of their empire and the cornerstone of their strategy, simply ceased to exist. The siege of Athens lasted 8 months. Cut off from supplies by land and sea, the city slowly starved. Children died in the streets, the population ate leather, boiled grass, and finally each other. The walls that had protected Athens for so long became the walls of a prison. In April 404 BCE, Athens surrendered unconditionally. The long walls were torn down to the music of flute girls. The Delian League was dissolved. Democracy was replaced by a council of 30 oligarchs, the 30 tyrants, backed by Spartan swords. The Golden Age was over. The city that had given the world Pericles and Phidias, Aeschylus and Sophocles, the Parthenon, and the concept of democracy itself, lay in ruins. Many of its greatest citizens were dead, exiled, or silent. The civilization that had reached such heights of human achievement had collapsed into barbarism and mutual destruction. The war that changed everything. The Peloponnesian War ended more than Athenian power. It ended an entire way of understanding the world. Before the war, Greeks had believed in progress, in the possibility of human improvement, in the compatibility of power and virtue. After the war, these beliefs lay shattered. The immediate consequences were clear enough. The power vacuum left by Athens' collapse was filled first by Thebes, then by Macedonia. Within a generation, Philip II and his son Alexander would unite Greece under foreign rule and launch the conquests that would spread Greek culture from Egypt to India. But the deeper consequences were philosophical and political. The war demonstrated the self-destructive potential of ideological conflict. Athens and Sparta didn't just fight over territory or resources. They fought over competing visions of how human beings should live. The result was a conflict so total and so devastating that it consumed both winners and losers. The Peloponnesian War was indeed the first modern war, not in its weapons or tactics, but in its totality, its ideological dimension, and its capacity for mutual destruction. It showed that technological and cultural advancement offer no protection against the fundamental human drives that lead to conflict. Most soberly, it proved that there are no permanent victories in human affairs, no final solutions to the problems of power and security. The Athenians who sailed for Sicily thought they were on the verge of creating a permanent empire based on superior ideas and institutions. The Spartans who tore down the long walls thought they had secured their way of life forever. Both were wrong. Within decades, both Athens and Sparta were peripheral players in a Greek world dominated by Macedon. Within centuries, Greece itself was a province of Rome. What endured were the ideas born in the struggle, about democracy and oligarchy, about the relationship between power and justice, about the human capacity for both greatness and self-destruction. These ideas, tested in the crucible of total war, became part of the permanent inheritance of Western civilization. The Peloponnesian War ended the classical age of Greece, but it began something else, the long, painful, ongoing human struggle to understand ourselves and our capacity for both creation and destruction. If this deep dive into ancient warfare has sparked your curiosity about how conflicts shape our world, make sure you're subscribed and hit that notification bell. We have incredible episodes coming up covering everything from the fall of Rome to the world wars that defined the modern era. Drop a comment below. Which ancient battle or war would you like us to cover next? Your suggestions help shape this series. Thanks for watching, and remember, Understanding the wars of the past helps us navigate the conflicts of today. Until next time, keep exploring history.